Recovery Council's Program and Grants Committee meeting. And why don't we do the introductions of the council members first? So Pat, I'll start with you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's Pat Kimball. I am the Recovery Council Chair. I am a recovery advocate. Welcome.
And Bruce.
Hi, Bruce Nodden, Maine Reentry Network, person in long-term recovery and a person who lives with mental health challenges. Good to see everybody.
Good to see you, Bruce. Chastity, you're just jumping on. We're just doing introductions if you're able to.
Sorry, my stuff had to update every time I open Zoom these days. Chastity Toole, I'm a harm reduction consultant specializing in rural Maine and advocacy.
Excellent. And Mary.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Coyne, and I'm the coordinator for the Maine Recovery Council.
And Haley.
There we go. Haley Tranko with the Attorney General's office. I'm not feeling super well today, so I'm probably going to keep my camera off for most of this meeting. Also, Katrina, I don't know if she's back at her desk yet. She was with our division a few moments ago, but Katrina Bonish is also with the Attorney General's office, just in case she's not back.
Thank you, Haley. And my name is Joe Everett, and I'm the president and CEO of the Opportunity Alliance here in South Portland by day, and I'm a council member and I chair this committee. So I am going to turn it over to Mary to introduce our guests and to lead pretty much the rest of the meeting. I don't believe we have minutes because the last meeting actually was Pat led the meeting because it was more or less a ad hoc council meeting. So Mary, take it away if you don't mind.
Not at all. Thank you. We have Leanna Lavoie, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, joining us here today. She is the Director of Community Health at the Center for Health Improvement in Farmington, and is overseeing the Franklin County Planning Award that was granted or allocated by the council back in December. And so Leanna and I met with her team a couple months back to discuss next step for them and what this process may look like. And so we're excited to have her here today to share a little bit more with us.
And Mary, I'm so sorry. Tucker, I said hi and then I didn't introduce you. So Tucker, you want to introduce yourself? And then I'll turn it back to Mary. Sorry about that, Tucker.
No worries. Tucker Pay, summer intern for Gordon Smith with the governor's office.
Awesome. Okay, Mary, sorry about that.
No worries. I think that's all. I'm sure I could go longer with an introduction, but Leanna, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So I did prepare a couple slides. I want to share my screen. Oh, I don't know if I can share my screen, Haley or Mary.
Yeah, 1 second. I'm just promoting you to co-host.
Ooh, promotions. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about this planning grant. We're very excited here in Franklin County. I can speak for my colleagues here. Just good. All right, so you see the presentation. Does it look like a presentation mode? Okay, great. So just to give you a little overview of what I'm going to talk about, I'm first going to talk about Franklin County and HCC, and then just give you a little bit of history of the evolution of substance use, opioid use epidemic work in Franklin County, because I think that will help set the stage for what we're proposing to do. But first, just to start, so our mission is working together to improve the health and well-being of individuals in our communities. And just of note, we're a community coalition that's been in existence for over 30 years, and we're now under Maine Health. So we're a program of Maine Health. Again, and I would say we're like the community health arm of the county, and we serve the greater Franklin County area. Our coalition works on lots of different things. We work in 3 major buckets: so chronic disease prevention and management, behavioral health prevention and management, and community outreach and access. We do a lot of policy. We have environmental change strategies. We also provide some direct services And I would say we're like the community conveners of the county. So we bring folks together to address community health needs. We are predominantly grant funded, and 50% of our funding does come from the federal government, about 30% from the state, and then the rest is private foundations throughout New England. And again, we really focus on what are the needs of our community and how do we address them, and what funding do we need to do that. And as you can imagine, a lot of our work over the past decade has been addressing the opioid epidemic, as that's been a major need. So just a little bit about Franklin County. Some of you may know, but just, we were once a thriving region of farming, dairy, forestry, paper production, and a shoemaking industry. And so over the past 2 decades, that has obviously changed. And that has contributed to, deep-rooted generational poverty, isolation, inadequate transportation, economic hardships, and then obviously limited services to programs. And so this has really had an impact on not only the opioid epidemic, but just access to care in general. Our population in Franklin County is about 30,000. Our income is less than the state average. We're 97% white. And we have 17 people per square mile. That just kind of talks to our ruralness. And the average US people per square mile is 94. So that does create a lot of challenges for us. So just a little, even though we have a lot of challenges, we have a lot of great community partners. And I just want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing since 2016 and even before that. But at that time, we established a recovery consortium, which had stakeholders from across the county really kind of invested in addressing the opioid epidemic. That council is still active today and meets monthly with over 30 community partners on that call every single month. And it's probably the most active consortium in our community. A lot happens in that group. We problem solve, we discuss what our gaps are, how can we really make a difference, and I'm very proud of that work. That council has led to us receiving some planning grant funding. So back in 2018, we were able to get a HRSA RCOR grant to again identify the gaps and the things that we need. From there, that led into an implementation grant to address prevention, treatment, and recovery. In 2022, we received a MEHAF grant to expand our harm reduction services on our mobile health unit, also including developing a syringe service program. And then another grant we received is a SAMHSA grant to expand our mobile harm reduction in rural Maine. So, and since this, I didn't add on, we are now getting funding from the Office of Behavioral Health for our recovery center, which we opened up over a year ago. I'm very proud of that work as well. And as I mentioned, we recently became a certified syringe service program. And I believe we're going to be getting some funding from the council to help operationalize that as well. So this is just a little bit of the history. So what did we do with that funding? Again, developed really strong community partners. We've increased naloxone access and program expansion. We have a substance use navigator that works with all of our partners, peer recovery coaching, mobile harm reduction services. We work closely with our ED to have rapid access, and then following up with referrals to our substance use navigator to make sure we get them into longer term treatment. Lots of stigma reduction to get to where we are from 2016 to now. We couldn't even talk about Narcan as a harm reduction strategy. That was just one. And now we have a syringe service program. So a lot of incredible amount of work went to educating and talking about, and also meeting our partners where they were at. They didn't always agree with our harm reduction strategies. And so, but we're now all kind of on the same page with a lot of the work that we're doing. We work with our jail very closely. We've increased MAT providers and services throughout the county. Again, a couple of these are also mentioned. And then we do a lot of primary prevention as well. I don't want to leave that out. I'm more focused today on our harm reduction and treatment and recovery services, but we also hold the Maine CDC's Maine Prevention Network funding. And we're in all of our schools and doing incredible work in that area as well. So that is just a little bit about us and what we're doing in Franklin County. And now I'm just going to transition to this planning grant. So you remember me saying the last time we did a planning grant was in 2016. So when the council put out there that Franklin County was going to receive $1.5 million for a 10-bed detox center, you know, I obviously, the first thing I did was I texted Gordon. I said, hey, this is exciting. We definitely need a detox center. Can you tell me more about this? And so him and I, along with our community partners, had lots of conversations about what does that mean for Franklin County, and could we even stand up a 10-bed detox center? And then, you know, what other services, if we had a 10-bed detox center, what then? And so where we landed, and we brought our community together, had this conversation with Gordon and Mary. We thought, well, let's take a step back, and what if we do a planning grant? What if we look at, you know, what are the current needs? We've done a lot of work over the past decade. Where are we at now, and how could we best utilize this funding? And so that's kind of where we're at. We developed 5 major goals. One is developing a 5-year strategic plan in the different pillars of prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery. Community engagement. So we would have an advisory committee looking at workforce readiness. What is the family treatment center, family-centered treatment and recovery options look like? And then the goal 5 is all around our community education and resources. So those are kind of like our 5 major areas of work. And within those, there's, you know, lots of specific strategies of what that looks like and how we would do that. And then, so this is kind of our estimated funding based on, you know, a 1.5 years of a planning grant. We would fund a full-time project manager and some of the director's time, stipends for our advisory committee members. We would partner with an evaluation team to help us with the community needs assessment, the environmental scan, obviously some supplies and travel, but that is kind of the bulk of what the funding would be used for. And then at the end, here are some of our project outputs. We'd have a completed environmental scan and needs assessment. We'd have a map of existing services. We'd develop a cost analysis and sustainability plan, obviously the 5-year strategic plan. There would be a report on recommendations on how to fund initiatives and strategies in prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery for both not just the state, but our county opioid settlement funds to consider. We would have a report on workforce development needs, because that's a big piece here, not just here, nationally and Maine and everywhere. Report on employer readiness to address SUD and recovery, mass reach health communication campaign to address stigma, and then a comprehensive directory for MOUD counseling, treatment, and recovery services. So that is kind of, at the end of this project, some of our outputs. And so that is just a very high level overview of what we're doing here in Franklin County and what we're hoping to do with this funding. So I don't know how this works, but do you have questions? Pat.
So I just want to commend you, first of all. Here we handed you money, and you said, wait a minute, we may not need that. And if we do spend it on detox, we're not sure how it works within our community. So I thank you very much. Again, you were going on the gaps that we saw. We appreciate, you know, I think I can speak on behalf of the council when I say it's nice, appreciated when we hear we get it. We love that gift, but can we really stand back a second? And that's hard to do in the middle of a crisis. So
Yeah.
I commend you. Your work looks really good. I look forward to seeing the results of that and looking and seeing how those recommendations play out. But the presentation was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate that.
So, Leanna, my questions are really like this is sort of a generative sort of question and maybe a conversation around sort of just, the feasibility, sustainability of this effort in rural Maine. And I think it's so huge.
Mhm.
And there's so many family needs, affected people. But what are your thoughts and like what ideas would you have for the council? Because, I think we've talked back in 2023 about making money available to sort of like just lump sums, and then we are on the road we're on. But just any thoughts or any suggestions for the council? And your presentation covered some, but just off the cuff.
Yeah, I think the funding piece is always the challenge. I mean, we have that with our community coalition that we're predominantly grant funded. I think part of this assessment is figuring out what is the sustainability. How do we do that? And I don't have a great answer, Joe, except for, when we did our planning grant in 2016, with that planning grant, it kind of launched us into this ability to address these needs in a bigger way and secure more funding, to be able to bring more resources and services. So some things are systems level change. So are there things that we can be doing as a healthcare system? Is there things that we need to have in place, like a detox center that can be financially viable? Those are all the questions I think need to be answered through this process. And yeah, so
No, that's great. And just for the group, Mary and I were chatting, and it kind of relates to this. I'll just say it that when we've been reviewing the LOIs, and one of the things that struck me was just the enormous gaps.
Mhm.
So like nothing that I read was kind of earth shattering, like, wow, that's gonna like change this problem forever. But it's really like just gaps. And I had a conversation with Dr. Kim Johnson, who we worked with. You may have known Kim was around, and her and I talked offline about population health. And really, you implement population health in San Francisco. So the federal government sends, or New York City. So I think Maine is so hard in general to get the attention and the money from the Fed. So it's just, I think, and I hope that the council can look at the LOIs, and I we're going to talk about this, and like almost use it as a bit of fact finding. When I read through, I'm like, wow, yeah, that's a good idea, but that should be funded by, OBH maybe, or that,
Right.
like, what's the pathway forward? So, but no, you did a great job. That was great. And
Yeah, thank
proposal's
you.
excellent. I think you guys are on the right track.
Yeah, that's great. Other questions?
So
Do you,
Haley, Pat,
yeah,
what's the frequency of hearing back from Leanna?
yeah.
What's our cadence and sort of like having bi-directional support? I mean, we need your wisdom, but we also want to be supportive. So we thought about that. I know we're still just getting the money out the door, so that might be
Yeah,
premature.
I don't think we've gotten that far. I think our real goal at this point was that we heard what they asked us, and that was that they really wanted to take some money to allocate to really look at where their gaps are before they made that decision. And at this point, it's really they've got the funding to be able to do it. We look forward to when they've completed that, to bringing that and their recommendations to the council, and then the council goes from there. Do they again, the council that at that point would have decisions whether they would fund it, whether it would go part of the grant process. But again, I think it's really giving them the opportunity to say, here's the gaps. This
Yes.
is what we've discovered. This is what we think. Not an exact science. This is what we think will work in our county, and then this is what we think the price tag or the support you would get from that. So I think that's where that I'm thinking on that. I don't know if the other council members think differently, but that was sort of my thought process in that.
Thank you, Pat. I really wanted just the people listening, the community, hear that response. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and you, Leanne, you have a contract, right? No, okay, so that's, there we go, the damn contracts. So we've got to get, now that we've heard this, then we'll get talking to Mary and talking to the legal aspect to it and get a contract out with some indicators in there about the expectations we have. But I think your presentation, the contract should be, I say this slightly, it should be easy. But no contract with us has ever been easy.
No,
But,
it never is. I work for the state, so I totally get it.
oh, there you go. So we're trying to make it easier than the state. So, Mary will get in touch with you when we do that. I see Chastity
Oh,
has.
yeah. Yes, I do have a, Chelsea, that's a great question, a more formal proposal that I can send to the council that does have a timeline of activities. I don't know if it, Mary, if it would be best if I just email it to you and you can share it with the council.
Yes, that works great. We have a council meeting on Thursday, so I can provide it to them.
What? I'm sorry.
Sorry, that works great. I can share it by our council meeting on Thursday.
Okay, great. Yeah, and Mary, you probably don't have a timeline on the contract, because I'm just trying to think of the staffing piece, because that always is takes the longest. And that's why I gave myself like a year and a half, because like by the time we get the evaluation pieces and all of that kind of up off the ground, it takes a while, so.
I don't have an updated timeline right now. Brendan and I will be meeting before the council meeting, and I'll get a sense of how the SSP contracts are going and then the youth prevention. So I'll be in touch once we kind of talk through that timeline.
Okay.
Yeah, and be sure.
Leanna or Mary, could one of you also send me a copy of the presentation we saw today so I can post it on the website? Thank you.
I can do that.
I think.
Okay, so yeah, do you want me to, like, I was gonna stay on and listen to the second part as like a member. Do I log off this and then go to the other link?
I think I can just send you over to that side.
Thank you, Leanna. That was very good.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for this
Yeah.
opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Maybe I can't. 1 second.
Okay, I can log off and log back in. No biggie.
All right, I think I got it.
Yep, she's over on the other side. You're so good.
I try.
You are excellent.
So I think next up, Mary's going to take us through LOI conversations.
Yes, let me just finish pulling up all the spreadsheets that I have on my desktop. Just give me a couple minutes.
So Mary, while you're pulling that up, I'm assuming that as much as possible, we are trying not to use the exact names yet of agencies that have submitted the LOIs, that we're not making that public yet until some decisions are made. So I'm asking people, I mean, just reminding everybody on the call that we're trying to keep them anonymous at the time right now. And when we're ready, we certainly will make all of it public, as we have all our other work. But currently, while we're in this stage, we're trying to keep that somewhat anonymous. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for prefacing this conversation with that, Pat. I also want to mention that as part of our discussion today, I don't anticipate we will even need to mention specific organizations or application titles. My hope for the committee meeting today is that we can focus on some of the more big picture process questions that have come up as you all have been reviewing the LOIs. At the end of July, the finance committee met and I walked them through a similar process of discussing some of the considerations that we as a council will need to take into account on Thursday when we do move forward and hopefully vote on that final slate of LOIs. And just so I can tell you all, and I'll share this again at the council meeting, part of the focus and one of our priorities at the council meeting is to determine a final slate of LOIs. But in addition to that, it's also to discuss the considerations for the grant application. And as many of you know, and as we shared with the public and at the summit, the letter of intent was really an information gathering process for us. And while it has allowed us to make some decisions, or will allow us to make some decisions, I guess, and I believe that will happen, it also has created essentially this database for us to understand, as Joe was mentioning, exactly what the need is. And the fact that we have 221 organizations requesting funding from all 16 counties is an incredible opportunity and privilege for this council. So I want to remind all of you of that, and that there will be parts of the LOI scoring process that really apply more to the grant. And that's why I'm hoping, again, we can discuss the LOI and we'll go through that process on Thursday, but we're also trying to set up a grant application that will hopefully allow our applicants to succeed and that uses all the information we've now learned from this process to make a better and more informed application. So I want to say all that because we won't be getting into too many of the details today, which I know is a little bit disappointing, but you'll wait till Thursday. And that's also in large part because I received the last evaluations yesterday evening, and I'm still waiting on a couple last minute scores to come through. So it takes time to do that. Courtney.
Mary, super quick. Is Barry Dunn going to be at the Thursday meeting?
They will not be, but I met with them this morning and we talked at length about the grant application. And we have come together with a recommendation for how we should move forward. I shared my insights and learning, and again, it will be the council's decision. But similar to the way we discussed at the finance committee, how we could structure some of the funding allocation, looking at how much funding per strategy, but also per type of project and categorizing it like that. I do anticipate the council will like a structure where we have a different tiered system that allows us to, have smaller organizations who are requesting smaller amounts of funding have a grant application that's catered to what they're requiring. And then our larger funding requests and larger organizations, again, they will have an application that matches sort of the caliber of the funding request.
Okay, and you or they, or a combination of you and them, will have that for us on Thursday, or it's going to take longer than that?
I will have that on Thursday. I will have the
Okay.
recommendation. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and with both the committee and council meeting this week, I have put most of my focus into developing that. Just to say that to everybody. So I want to start, and again, part of this review has, been looking at some of these odd one-off circumstances with our evaluations. And there's a process that I can move forward with, but as the coordinator, I do not want to make any decisions for the council. So it's important for me to discuss some of the adjustments I'm making to the scoring with this committee. We can go through and discuss, if anything would like to be changed, and then I can make a more informed process for Thursday. So to start, we had a couple applications or I should say a couple evaluations where the reviewer did not believe or did not deem the submission to meet our eligibility requirements. And when that occurred, what I saw in a couple instances is the evaluator didn't complete the rest of the evaluation. I reached out to those evaluators in hopes of getting final scores, but I do want to keep our, again, very small, short timeline in mind. My recommendation to the committee is that in those instances where there's quite a bit of variance between 2 evaluations and the third one, that we remove that outlier and then we calculate our metrics based off of those 2 evaluations. So the average score, the average recommendation would just be based on 2 scores versus all 3. I will say that from what I know so far, there is quite a bit of overlap and also quite a bit of range in how these were scored. So it does feel important that we don't that we don't incorrectly categorize or discuss an application because of sort of a misinterpretation in the evaluation process, which will happen, and we will ensure, it moves forward in a better way. But that is my proposal for how we do that. Again, eliminating the third, using just the 2 evaluations, if I don't receive the final evaluations in time. Pat?
So Mary, the outliers that you're talking about, one is the outliers if the reviewer did not complete it, they didn't answer all the questions. And how do you determine the second outlier? Do you have a definition as to if a score is like 2 scores are almost close, but one is way off? Do you have a number in mind or a percentage as to how you determine that?
Great question, and that's another question for the committee to discuss. As of now, I've looked at the more severe outliers, ones where they're receiving a really low score of 5 or 6 and are receiving 2 other scores of 15 and 16. So that feels like a clear differentiation to me, but it is important that the committee thinks about, and if we can provide a recommendation as to what degree of variance we're comfortable with, knowing it's a 16-point total evaluation score and then a 4-point recommendation score.
Wait, Mary, isn't it 17?
Actually, it might be 18. Wait, don't quote me on that. I'm sorry.
I was like, wait, I scored everything
No.
wrong.
I've been doing so much math that
It is
my
17.
brain is fried. Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
well, while I'm off mic,
So it is 17.
I agree with removing like a 0 score. Like if they didn't do the thing, then I hope they just do the thing. But if they don't, then remove that. I think that we had this process for a reason, and that everyone's scores matter. So I would feel a little more uncomfortable with taking out low scores. I don't know. Yep.
I was going to say similar. I would want to hear from the person with the low scores to hear why, because maybe it's something they are very knowledgeable about and that's why it's low. So I don't think we should just automatically remove it.
Okay. And just to clarify, you're both talking about not removing low scores. We should remove low scores from as outliers. But if an application was not fully scored, then we should remove that score. Is that correct?
Yeah, if it's not completed, then it shouldn't count. But if it's completed and it just scored low, then it counts.
Okay, great, that's helpful. Because we had some instances where, again, 1 or 2 criteria were scored and not the others. So it has a really low score value. And then when I dug in a little bit deeper, these were some of the trends I saw. Pat?
Did MEHAF or Barry Dunn give you any feedback into that decision about the outliers and the differentiate of the school? As I know you talked to me, have. So do they have a process where they have a big gap in scores, what they do?
From what I understand, when there is a big gap in scores, they move through a process similar to what Chastity and Courtney described of keeping those scores in place and then making a note of significant variance between the evaluators. And then those were a separate category in what they discussed. And that is part of my plan for Thursday as one of sort of the themes that we see. And again, I just wanted to make sure that that was the will of the council.
Yeah, I think this is very tricky. I think that, and Mary and I had a quick call and I didn't break any rules, but I think, it's people know things. So like I tried to read everything through a very neutral lens. But to Chastity's point, if I really know something, that can influence. So, one of the things, Mary, you said to me, and it was in the context of, and it was not in the context of a particular application, but when I ran like sort of the eligibility, you're like, yeah, I think kind of everyone, the way it's laid out in our LOI, everyone was. So I think that there's subjectivity. And Pat, to your point, is where I'm at. Like, how does this council that's going to be around for 20 years manage that? And we're in the process of a competitive process, so it's harder. But I think these are the things, and my default, because I've done so many state and federal RFPs, is sort of their process. I also found it challenging not having a complaint process or appeal process. So knowing that like people can't appeal, so I'll say that. The other thing that, and I'm not advocating in one way or the other, the other thing is that, bigger applicants know more about the process. They know not to forget something, they know. And then, so I don't want to like eliminate a smaller applicant because they don't really know, oh, that T needs to be crossed at a certain level. Those are the things that I would love for us to, and I don't know how we do this, without creating ruckus, but I think that's where kind of I was stuck. So I try to be pretty neutral when looking at it without each of my application or my LOIs.
That's helpful insight. Thank you, Joe. Courtney?
Two things. Joe, I 100% agree with you on the looking through it through a neutral lens. I actually hid the organizations' names while I was doing it to help me do that process separate from what I think I know. Also, the part where I really struggled was that we didn't have a budget or like any type of like budget. Even a bare bones budget would have helped me frame issues. And I mean, I think it's just like learning. We learned a lot. And so, I mean, I won't talk about what I did score something low, and I have a reason for that. And I'm willing to explain that on mic. And it's not about the organization. It's literally about the project. And not thinking that it's was aligned with our priorities that we discussed.
Courtney, I'm glad you brought that up because another theme that I saw a couple times, and this didn't happen very often, but where a reviewer did mark on their score sheet that a submission did not align with the pillar. There was one thing with the priority strategy, but there was a few where the reviewer identified this doesn't seem like it aligns with this pillar, or this aligns better with a prevention strategy. And in those cases, and I know that there is a lot of overlap and you could make a case as to why something falls under probably multiple pillars, and that's the nature of this work. Does the committee have any recommendations for how we move through the process with those types of submissions if it is noted in an evaluation that the pillar seems inaccurate? Does the committee want those highlighted? How do we want to move through that process? Pat?
So as someone who actually did that, um, I wouldn't go by one evaluator, you know, because there's a couple and I looked at and I thought, does it really belong under this pillar, or is this really a prevention piece? But again, if you have 3 reviewers and I'm the only one that sees that, then maybe it was just my perception. And again, sometimes when you look at a project, it can fit under multiple pillars. It's not just, if you look at a recovery center, where does that really, there's all sorts of things they do within a recovery center. So I wouldn't go by like one person's piece, but it may be a discussion that we have. And if we really believe it belongs in another pillar, but particularly in this round where prevention is going to happen later on, that we ask them to apply under prevention. But I wouldn't go by one person, but if if 2 out of 3 looked at it and said, does it really belong there? Then I may look at it and move it. But I was someone who did that. I think I did it at least twice.
And you were not alone in that. Courtney?
I also did that, and I think I happened to do it twice. I don't need to know if it was the same twice at this point, but I think that, Mary, I wonder, I don't know if you're making us like a spreadsheet or like some type of way to bring this information to the council. I'm assuming you are. So I don't know if you could make a, like, at the bottom, say these are the ones that seem to have multiple people mention that it wasn't in the right pillar, or it was prevention, or the strategy isn't allowable, and we're gonna have to just like go one by one and make a decision together.
Great. You mean one by one for each of those applications where the pillar was incorrect?
Yeah, the ones that stand out as like, you're not sure what we're gonna do here because a couple of people said this is actually a prevention project, or this is actually not an allowable expense, or etc. And we're gonna have to make a decision as a full council. Do we have to be out of there by 4:30 on Thursday? Because that's gonna be challenging. And maybe I'm
They
wrong on
lock the
that.
building up at 5.
Okay.
So we
Or
have to
stop
be
at 5.
on the other side of the doors by 5 p.m.
Okay.
So not to put words in your mouth, Courtney, but I think that when I look at my 50-ish LOIs, the majority of them did sort of get everything. They sort of understood the process. So I think to your point, Courtney, about kind of looking at those outliers, again, where it's the first time, I think it's worthwhile to do that because most people understood it. The other thing I'd say, kind of back to Pat and Courtney's point, and again, not putting words in your mouth, but I do think that many of us who work in the sector and have for 100 years, like we know feasibility. And when someone's proposing a project that we know the rules because we've been facing them for 100 years, like that's something that I think we know. Like it's sort of like it's public information. So I think things like that weren't hard for me because they weren't feasible. But I think these other ones that are, I don't want to just exclude people because of sort of these things, because we could change this whole process in the next year.
And I'm sorry, the other thing I wanted to mention, it goes back to what Joe was saying around small orgs. This doesn't capture every small org, but part of my intention for advocating so strongly around the 1 point for organizations led by people in recovery is because people who use drugs, is because it's often those organizations that are the small organizations that don't know how to write grant applications. And I felt really good about being able to give them that 1 extra point. And I think really helped a lot of those small orgs that are peer led in this scoring application process.
I too love that, Courtney. I love seeing that checked. Like that was really a go team. I think that was really a great addition.
And I think it was about equity, right? So
Yes.
the ones that can't write because they haven't had access to the traditional resources that others have were able to score a little higher.
Yeah.
And maybe they scored a little lower in the other spots because of disenfranchisement.
Right.
That,
So I have to ask because my head is spinning. You're not really suggesting that we go through all 200 applications on Thursday.
That is
That's
not what I
what
said.
I'm hearing. Oh, okay.
That's not what I
Okay.
said. I said
Okay.
outliers that seem to be
Okay.
like these questions that Mary has, like if you and I both said this is a prevention application, then I want to know about that and we need to make a decision and tell
Yeah.
them that this is a prevention application and they're disqualified from this round, but they should definitely apply next time.
Next time. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was clear because I'm thinking, oh dear Lord, no, not 200.
And Pat, I was thinking this is going to be a handful of applications, and I would be curious what your experience has been at the United Way, how like, and that arbitrate isn't quite the word, but like who is
Yeah.
going to do that? Like at other funders, like there are sort of these question applications, like, I think there's sort of conversation
Yeah.
that
See,
happens.
what the United Way does is it's an interesting piece. So they know who scores the same grants. And so they bring that group together and they look at the scores and people can talk about why they scored it a certain way. And it's your one last chance to either change your score, either higher or lower, or by the conversation. And so then those scores get grouped, sent to a subcommittee. The subcommittee makes an approval list of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 1 are funded, tier 2 are maybes, and tier 3 are usually not. But you actually meet with the group of people that scored the same grant you did for about an hour just to discuss why did you give them a 4, why did you give them a 3. And again, sometimes, and then they'll give you one chance to change it. You can either say, nope, sticking with it, or I'm changing it. And then they go from there. But that's just the Bangor, the way they do theirs. It's worked for a long time.
I think, Pat, that's what I'm talking about doing, except for not for all of them, just for any that are very clearly an outlier that Mary identifies, whether or not we both said it was prevention, or Chastity scored it a 2 and you scored it a 17. Like, how did that happen? And having those conversations, and hopefully it's 20, not 200, that we need to have those conversations about before we can move forward.
Yeah, agree. Yep.
and also to add, I do not plan to make a presentation with all 221 submissions, but as we've been reiterating, to show you all the themes and natural groups are already occurring, and then also highlight, again, these outliers or these special circumstances. And those applications will be included in these groups, but we will discuss them separately to make sure they're appropriately matched or categorized in some ways. What will be a little bit tricky is if there are changes, we're doing this in real time, so I will have to go to my computer to create the final list. But I'm sure we can do it. I also want to remind folks about what I mentioned at the beginning, that the letter of intent has created many different learning opportunities for us. And a lot of these discussions, and I anticipate more on Thursday, will be appropriate for us to talk about in the context of the grant. So it may not be, enough. I'm not quite sure the wording for this, but we might not have enough grounds within the context of the letter of intent rubric and evaluation process to eliminate an application because of certain requirements it did or did not meet. But in the grant application, we can highlight that, and we can make sure that criteria is mentioned, and that organization, if they don't meet that criteria, right, they won't likely have a great chance of success. And that's something that the letter of intent has now informed us about. So we're now able to provide that information to the applicant, and especially the smaller organizations, to say, here's what we're moving forward with. Here's how you're scoring, or in the context of others, or here are certain criteria you're not meeting. It is up to you if you would like to move forward and submit a grant. So I do want to encourage the committee and council to consider that. We'll likely go over the 3 times threshold that I recommended. But for the integrity of this process, I think that's the best way to go about it.
So
Wait.
Mary, I really like that. And I think that, we're not state and federal government. I think we want to get this money out. As I said early in the meeting, the need is enormous. That's what I learned. There's so many gaps. There's so many underfunded projects in place. So I think the more that can move along and we can evaluate our process and make process improvement. But that's sort of music to my ears to sort of, that let's keep moving forward.
And Mary, just for clarity, are you saying you don't think we're going to be able to eliminate applications in this round?
I do believe we'll be able to eliminate some. I don't believe we'll be able to eliminate, I don't believe we'll be able to eliminate to the point where we have 36 million per pillar that move forward. I think we'll have more applications moving forward and having the opportunity to submit a full grant than we had initially anticipated, just based on this rubric. And again, it's really more of an information gathering process than something to limit or remove somebody from moving forward in our process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I understand why, and I'm okay with it. I just want to remember why I originally thought we were doing an LOI was so that we didn't waste people's time. So I would like to at least be honest and transparent to the extent possible in the LOI process, with the understanding that, we didn't ask them for a budget, and like we didn't ask them for a board of directors list, etc., etc.
Most definitely. And that's a discussion that we'll continue to have Thursday. And it would be great actually if we could start now, because from the beginning of this process, the council has continued to emphasize that we want to make this fair. We want it to be accessible. And we want to make sure that if an organization is invited to apply, they're doing so with as much information as possible. So even if some organizations score lower than others and they're still invited to apply, one process we could use is highlighting the average score by pillar or by category, and then including that specific submission's total score or average score. We can also give a range of how many applications we intend to fund within each tier of grants, and then allow organizations and applicants to make an informed decision from there. I'm not really phrasing this as a question, but I would love for us to start to consider what some of that communication may look like, and what, from your perspectives, would be most helpful for information for an organization to receive if they're trying to see where they stand in sort of the lineup of organizations. Pat?
So because some people may, if the grant application is done and they can see it, some organizations may take them out and say, you know what, this is too complicated for me, I won't do it. But do we also have, and I can't say were there large awards that we wouldn't intend to fund? I mean, I haven't seen the whole thing. So were there like an organization that asked for, $10 million? I mean, will there be a limit and we discussed a limit in this grant process that someone may say, well, I needed my $1 million or I can't do this project and I won't settle for 500,000. I don't know. And I don't want to, stop a conversation, but I was wondering if some of that would make people, but I don't know the range of what people ask for money. I know there was some low ones. I had some low ones. I don't think I had anything that was like huge that I remember.
I don't have the range right in front of me. What I do plan to provide is a range of funding requests by pillar, and then also narrowing that down by priority strategy and then if possible, project type. One of the recommendations coming out of the finance committee a couple weeks ago was that we look at setting up our grant application as determining a set allocation amount for each type of program and then inviting applicants to apply. And if they can't continue their project effectively within that threshold, again, that's something that they'll take into consideration. Or if it's sort of above what they were anticipating, maybe there's opportunity for them to be more innovative or space for them to move forward with a project that they may not receive funding for otherwise. So it was a recommendation for program and grants that we can continue to discuss. We didn't, as far as I remember, put any recommendations on what category specifically or that set amount, but it was discussed and also aligns with my recommendation for the 3-tiered grant system on Thursday.
Thank you.
Pat, I think I got a lot of treatment LOIs and that there were some high numbers to your point. So I would appreciate a conversation about thresholds and to marry your point.
Because you don't want an agency to make all that work knowing that you're not going to give somebody, $4 million. It's like, if you want to ask for a portion, when you're applying, you don't have to apply this round, but you need to know that we're not going to accept. And I don't know, and again, I hate to throw something in there. I also don't know whether we looked at gaps in areas too, in the fact that, are we going to look at all geographic area in regards to awarding grants, knowing that some parts of our state have huge gaps. Not that every area has gaps, but some are larger than others. And I don't know whether that's coming to play in any of this at all.
Courtney?
I would like us to see, and I would like us to determine how many grants we're going to make and how much those grants are going to be. I don't know what those numbers should be, Mary. Like, I think that you would have to pull out a spreadsheet to figure out that, but before the grant application goes out, I would like us to be able to say, we're going to award 5 $50,000 grants, 10 $100,000 grants, and 2 $1 million grants. Those are made up numbers. Because I think people are struggling to understand what we can do and what the actual feasibility of this money is.
Yes, and I do, again, plan to provide a recommendation for 3 separate tiers, which will align with that. My recommendation is to include a range of how many applications we'll fund based on the discussion so far. And again, how many submissions I anticipate will invite to apply. I don't know if it would set us up or the applicants up for success if we limit it to one number, but instead doing a range of, let's say 25 or keeping it minimum. Okay.
Yeah.
With that being said, 2 more specific process questions that I'd like you all to weigh in on. At the Finance Committee, we also briefly discussed potentially using some of our December allocations towards projects that aligned with those that were part of our grant application. Is that something the council would like to consider as a sort of funding source for the grant? So similar, let's say if we looked at the 1.5 million detox in Androscoggin, or we have 125,000 for the SSP, we've got a couple others. If that is sort of a set aside we'd like to look at, then I can review the applications and provide a list of potential candidates. But it would be helpful to know if, 1, we would like to do that, and 2, if we would like to see those submissions included in that separate category altogether, or included in both, again, a separate category and then sort of this larger pot of money. Gordon?
I've been thinking a lot about that, and I apologize for being late. It makes sense to me too, and I'm really glad to hear that the finance committee considered this, and still has it on the table. I think we should use as much money as we have, but recognizing that Ben and the finance committee would, I mean, I'm not suggesting we spend every single cent, but it wouldn't make sense to me, for instance, if we know we have, let's say we have $12 million now, but that by the end of December, we anticipate having $20 million or $24 million. I'd really like to at least talk about adding some of that December money on top of the money that we've already, talked about allocating for these projects. My reasoning is that I looked at a large number of projects. I thought there were a lot that were deserving of support. And to think that we might go through this again in 2025 with that new money, and receive the same applications again that didn't meet the threshold, that's kind of crazy. Let's take as much money as we have and fund as many priority projects as we possibly can, even if it means that the next announcement might be delayed by 6 or 8 months than it otherwise would. So I did not talk to anybody on the finance committee about this. I don't know that I've talked to virtually anyone about it, but I think it is a terrific idea, given how long our process is taking. And now why wouldn't we use the money that's available at the end of the process? Thank you.
So Mary, I kind of missed the beginning of what you said. So can you clarify? So the December projects, what do we mean by that?
So I'm talking about the 9 million that we allocated in December. Some of those allocations were very specific, and we had an organization or various organizations that money was going towards. Others, like the detox in Androscoggin, that was a set aside without a specific organization that we intended to fund. So my question is, if there is an organization that's, applying to start up a detox in Androscoggin, would that be something the council want to consider using that December set aside as part of this grant money?
Okay. And Gordon, were you thinking when you were speaking to that point about the applications that we're going to get in this round and looking at them? I'm sorry, I'm having a dense moment. What was your thinking when you added to Mary? I'm having a bit of a senior moment here.
Well, I raised my hand again because I misunderstood the proposal. Pat, I think understood this. It may be that Pat and I have talked about this, but I don't recall that. So I was thinking December of 2024. I was thinking ahead, the money that's going to be coming in the rest of this year. I want to put that on top of what we have now and fund more projects. I wasn't on the same wavelength with Mary about December. I have no problem thinking about using some of that money that's not otherwise going to be getting out the door either. I mean, we can always reverse course on any of those. So, but that's not what I was thinking about.
And I agree with you on both points because I think in alignment with where your head was. I want everyone who is in a huddle to get their money. So if we did talk about someone in Andro getting something, to Chassie's point, I want our word to be good. So if we did sort of have conversations, I would want to honor those, even though I know sort of wasn't a hard and fast process.
Can I just quickly clarify that the money that was set aside for Androscoggin is now going to Tessa's house, so we don't have any leftover set aside money from December 2023 to allocate?
No, Haley, I think that was Franklin County. We reallocated the Franklin
okay.
County
So,
money.
okay, then that's my bad. I'm confused. Thank you.
That's okay.
Thanks,
So,
Haley.
so that money is still set aside for
Yes.
Androscoggin County. We're not counting it.
Right.
That's in the 9 million that we allotted
Mhm.
in December of 23.
Right.
So that money is still there
Yeah.
to write that RFP or do what we want with it. We rearranged a little bit of the money for Franklin County, which you saw today.
Mhm.
The money, to my understanding, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, the money is still there that we allocated. And I'm with Joe. If we promise to do a detox in Androscoggin, we either have to talk to them and say, like Franklin, do you really want it? And if they do, then I think we honor what we said we were going to do.
So we said that we were going to allocate $1.5 million to Androscoggin in December of 2023, but we never talked about who, where, what, when. There's no like waiting night to open a detox in Androscoggin right now. And so if there does happen to be an LOI that wants to open a detox in Androscoggin, I think they would be very eligible for the 1.5 million that we have set aside for that type of project. If they're in the LOI process. So I would say yes, that money's on the table as long as it's a detox in Androscoggin. Second is Gordon, I think, is talking about also future money. I think that that money is also on the table as long as we still have some money set aside for a prevention process in the coming months. I just don't want to spend like everything, and that was what I was worried about when we didn't include prevention in this LOI process, was that we'd get super excited about all the LOIs that we have in front of us and then spend all the money. So just as I want to spend every single dollar that we have that isn't prevention money and that is available to us in this process. Because I don't even think I'm going to be here next year because I'm going to law school, but I don't want to see you guys have to do this process either again next year. Next year, I think, is going to be all about contracts and oversight of the grant money that goes out in this process. So we can spend next year's money too. So yes, spend all the money, Mary.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gordon?
Yeah, and I assume we could have some of this discussion at the council meeting on Thursday. I don't want to digress into the issue of medically supervised withdrawal beds at this meeting, but I do think it would be a fair process to sit down with a large coalition in Androscoggin County of any organization that might be interested in that and talk frankly with them about what they think their needs are. Almost exactly what we've done in Franklin County. And the reason is that we have, I'll just give you the bottom line, we have about 125 detox beds, and it appears to be, at least at this point in time, sufficient to meet the demand. And it would be kind of, it would actually impair the financial stability of some of our existing facilities if we just keep opening up detox beds when I know that they're not 70% full. So again, it's something that we didn't anticipate, but I think that the group in Androscoggin absolutely would want to also have that discussion. They don't want to spend a year or 2 years to put up 10 detox beds and then find that all the demand is being met by the existing projects around the state. So the last one that we're committed to is Tessa's house, 8 detox beds on that first floor that will open up in the fall. And then there's a private facility that's going to come online by the end of the year. So we really are going to have quite a few detox beds available. And that wasn't what we were looking at last December when we put in 1.5 million for Androscoggin. So again, I have digressed into it. I apologize, but I think it's important that you hear that.
Thank you, Gordon. And I'd also like to just add or put out there to this committee that once we have a grant application that's published, there will be many things we have to work through, not just in this committee, but as a full council. And one of those things I anticipate will be adjustments to the December allocation to ensure primarily that we are supplementing and not supplanting any funds. And that's also a consideration for the grant process and something that I talked to Barry Dunn about at considerable length this morning, and what components we need to include in our grant to ensure that doesn't happen. And a lot of that will do with the budget, as well as asking questions about other funding streams to ensure that, again, what we're doing is not something that another funding source is taking care of, for lack of a better word. So to recap all of that, I will note if there are any applications for a December funding award. Also, this is helpful for us to talk about now because we only have 3 hours on Thursday. So I appreciate all of you not just talking through all of this. I want to go back to something we discussed early on around variance and scores. As coordinator, I don't want to make the decision about what is too much variance and needs to be discussed and what's an acceptable amount of variance between scores. Does the committee have any thoughts or recommendations as to how we should sort of sort through the differences in evaluation scores? Or suggestions from other grant
Mary,
officers?
do you know what the lowest score is?
The lowest score right now is a 2, which will likely be adjusted based on conversations or eliminated because that was one that wasn't fully scored.
Okay, so I'm sorry, let me reiterate. Let me try that again. Do you know the lowest score that was a completed evaluation?
This is, don't quote me on this, but I believe it was an 8 or 7.
Okay.
So,
And again, I'll give all those numbers on Thursday, but we also had some perfect scores who also received a perfect recommendation score. And I will be looking at the total evaluation score and the recommendation scores, two separate metrics, as I mentioned early on. So when I look at the average score, that will be 2 different scores, as well as the variance. And I do think this committee could weigh in on sort of how much influence that recommendation score will have over a total evaluation score. And again, with variance, I know that this is very tricky and in the weeds, but because we haven't established processes for all of this before, I welcome any discussions around these topics.
So here's my weird thing. So I can think of one that I probably scored high, but I scored incredibly low is defunding it. And part of it was I had a question about the funding was going to a private individual with no I had no idea anything about the person. It was a private person. The proposal was a great proposal, but I scored it as a recommendation until somebody could answer me this question. Why are we writing a check to an individual? He's not an LLC. He's not a company. He's not affiliated with a company. And so those are the kind of, I guess that we'll sort of pull those out at the full council meeting. But I can think of one that I probably scored decently. I was trying to look to see if I could find it. But I can tell you, I didn't recommend it to go forward because it was a private person. And the question was, is that allowable? Are we giving money to private people?
Mm-hmm. And to add to that, Pat, I did see similar scoring where the total evaluation score was higher, but the recommendation score was low based on either how much funding that organization was known to be receiving, if that doesn't feel like a crucial need. There was sort of a variety there, but something I will definitely pull out if they're, especially with top scoring evaluations and low scoring recommendations. Gordon?
well, we can confirm this and talk about it on Thursday, but I thought that we had determined that individuals and corporations and for-profits and municipalities were all eligible. were all eligible. So the fact that a person, we have a lot of individuals in Maine who choose to operate their own business. They don't have to operate it as an LLC. And they can have it operated as a sole proprietorship, for instance, for tax purposes. So that's just, something that we can talk about on Thursday, because I don't think that that's, I thought that we had determined that that type of a proposal was an eligible proposal. But I wanted to ask a question, Mary, so that I think I understand what you're saying about these variances. And and perhaps it would be possible, well, let me ask the question. Is it possible, now that you've seen virtually all the scores, are you concerned that some individual scorers were uniformly high and others were maybe uniformly lower, so that if your application got with this particular individual, you're much less likely to reach our threshold? Is that the variance you're talking about? That there were more, just like going to college, I think I'd be a terrible professor because I suspect I'm a pretty high scorer. Is that the type of variance you're talking about?
Where were you when I was in school?
I can confirm you are on the higher end of scoring. Yes, Gordon. That is not the variance I'm talking about. I'm talking more about variance between, well, I mean, I guess in some ways, yes, I'm talking about that. I'm talking about the variance between the three separate LOI scores
I
for one
see.
application. And you bring up a great point, because something I spoke with the Attorney General's office about and Barry Dunn about a month ago was if there the impact that the evaluator has essentially on the scores. And if an individual who scored 60 like you, if there's trends into how those scores went and potentially impacted the total scores, if we want to weight the scores differently, I mean, that's something that we can do. I'm gonna have to go pull out my stats textbook to do that, but I can. If that's something that the committee would like to see as a point of comparison, I'm happy to do that.
Well, I don't know. I think that we want to be fair. And so I think it would be good to know, like, take the highs and the lows so that we're aware that that might be an issue. I myself do not have any concern about variability and variance within the three people who score an application. That's why we have three people look at it. Three people, one person could say that's a fine proposal, and another could say it's a terrible proposal. That's why we've got a minimum of three people looking at all that. That's just not a variance that I think I'm concerned about. Maybe I'm crazy.
And Courtney, I know you have your hand up, but Gordon, I'm in agreement, and I really don't want my scores undone. Like, I feel like I have a lot of experience. I know the industry. I followed the rules. To Pat's question about, like, I went back, like Pat did, to see who was eligible. I checked in with Mary. I gave good scores like Gordon because I think they were good LOIs for the most part. So I think this sort of Mary making more work for you. I think the reality is if 150 move forward, I won't be upset. Like, people put some thought into these LOIs. So I think that now to say, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, I think that's a lot of busy work for you, Mary. And I think we need to move forward with what we have and learn from it. And I think, Gordon, I thought a lot about you in reviewing these because you have your thumb on the pulse statewide, and there's so many gaps, there's so many needs, and things are changing daily. So today it's a detox, but tomorrow you need something else. So that's my thought. I don't think we need to make a lot of work, because I think if you followed the process, and Courtney, I know you're going to say, don't try to cut you off, but you led us through a process, and we went through painstakingly, category by category, and that's what I followed, that work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Courtney?
I agree with Gordon and Joe. I think I just changed my mind. I think all of our scores stand. Gordon and I have very different lived experience, right? And like what I bring to the table is very different than Gordon. And that's why we're all appointed to this body and why we were all asked to score these applications. And I think that that's the beauty of this council, right? And if I scored something very, very low and Gordon scored it very high, I'm just using you, Gordon, as an example, then there's a reason and we should honor that reason. And so I think all the scores stand and we just aggregate them and you do not pull out your statistic book because that sounds very complicated and not fun at all for anyone who is involved. So I just backed down off of my like, even just put the scores on the paper, take all three of them and divide it by 3 and give us our averages.
Great, thank you. And I will add, again, from my perspective, when I read through all of your evaluations, the expertise from every evaluator and your level of knowledge and skills in this area of work was so obvious to me. It was really wonderful and humbling to know that I get to work with all of you. You all had your own unique perspectives, but it was another moment of me really recognizing why all of you are on this council. And so, as you all said, that is the beauty of it. And you all came at it from different perspectives. We avoided conflicts. So I will not be pulling out my stats textbook. I also
That's the last thing I'll say. At the end of the day, we have to build a consensus on this committee. We need a 2/3 vote to move anything. And that means that we're going to have to find the things that we all agree on. And some of us might not agree on other things, but it's better for the culture of this council to highlight the ones where we do and to not try to, I don't know, not try to not build a consensus in our final round of what does get funded.
Great, thank you. Haley has a question.
It sounds like you guys are pretty decided on this now. I was just gonna suggest an in-between step at first. Mary, before you were actually gonna like look at the scores and determine if any of them needed to be adjusted, that would involve you not pulling out your stats book, and that's that I could take a look at everyone's scores, quickly pull together an average score that each person gave, and then determine the deviation between those scores and see if anybody scored statistically relevantly lower or higher. And then we could deal with that info once we have it.
I actually think that's a good idea. It doesn't take too much work, and we might not do anything with the information, but then, I mean, I would like to know if I'm an outlier. You know, maybe next time I would do things a little bit differently. So I think if Haley can do that without spending days at it, I do think that that's okay. I mean, we might even want to just see them by anonymously, you know, through through 1 through 16, however many people scored, 15, whatever. You know, put in the average score for number 1, and only you would know who the individual was, and then we can see, and we can talk about it on Thursday. I think that's a good idea myself.
Well,
Yeah,
if you anonymize them, I don't get to find out if I'm trying to get Gordon as my professor in law school because he hands out all A's.
Yeah, we'll keep it anonymous.
I think you should keep it anonymous if you do it. You know, the point isn't to make people feel bad if they discover they're the hardest scorer, or that they're too lenient and they're up there. I don't think that the purpose is, because we have some people on the committee that have been very clear. This is the first time they've ever done this. They were a little nervous about doing it. So I think if we do it, I think it needs to be anonymous. And if you can identify yourself in that, that's fine. But you don't have to do it in public, and you don't have to do it in front of the council, and you can self-reflect.
Well, I think it's anonymous, but I also think that an individual can go to Mary and self-identify, because otherwise we're not going to meet the goal of knowing whether you're you're an outlier or not. You'll just know that, oh, there are outliers. So I don't see any problem with that. I don't want anybody else's average score, but I want my own.
Yeah, that would be quick for me to pull together, and we might end up doing nothing with the information anyway.
I think there's a lot of um not a lot, but there's potential for bias. I mean, we all see, to Courtney's point and Gordon's, through a lens. So I think that's where I try to be careful. And like Courtney, I try not to look at who the applicant or the LOI was from, but it was hard sometimes not to when you're reading the body. But I think it does, when you're reading something in rural Maine and you're like, oh my goodness, they need it so bad. And it's so, that's just reality. So I think we're learning and we just need to keep moving it. And Gordon, we're probably not going to be allowed to score because it sounds like we're both generous scorers.
Well, I was going to add that I really did try to eliminate the fact that I knew the organization. I probably knew, I mean, let's be honest, we have encouraged a lot of these applications from recovery centers, recovery residences. I mean, so it's no surprise that I might have known 50 of the 60 organizations. And I really did try to not be too subjective in saying, oh, I don't think these people can do this. I really tried to take it at face value and say, who am I to judge? It's a good application. And because I almost approached it as a lawyer in where we have evidence, and then you can't, that what we give to the jury is they're not and you all know this, that they're not supposed to bring in extraneous matters that, in the jury room, oh, well, I don't think he's guilty because I know his sister-in-law and she goes to church and there's a wonderful family. No, you call it as you see it based on the facts that are before you. So I tried to simply score the letter of intent and the project and ignore whatever my personal opinions might be of an organization. I tried it. So, I think, Joe, sounds like you did the same thing. Of course, we know it's a small state. We know a lot of these organizations, and I think many of them should be given a chance to complete an application.
Thank you. Anything else right now?
Mary, is there anything more you need from us before Thursday's meeting, or Pat?
Most of what I need is now on a spreadsheet. Thank you all for this insight. It does give me direction for Thursday. I do want a couple of sort of administrative things. One, as Pat mentioned, to the absolute best of my ability, I'm going to keep the submissions anonymous. I'm also going to include the overall scores and also not call out each individual score unless there was significant variance. And then I plan to include initials. And again, if there is an opportunity for you all to speak up, I think that would be appropriate. I just want to give you the heads up. If that's the case, would you all like, I don't want to kill a tree, but would you like the LOIs printed for you, or could you all access them on your computer and pull up your evaluation spreadsheet? Okay, wonderful. Believe that's it. Oh, the last thing, and I have a meeting with Brendan scheduled for Thursday to just confirm that we have all our boxes checked for the actual scoring process. As we mentioned, the plan is not to go through 221 and score individually, but instead to score the groups and then, as needed, score sort of the submissions that are on the line individually. So that's the plan for Thursday. And I will start the meeting off by presenting the recommendation for the grant, again, to hopefully help ground everyone and what we're looking at for the next step, and what should be taken into consideration for the LOI. Gordon?
Just, are we wrapping up the meeting, Joe? Because I did want to bring up one other matter that I'd like to bring up at the council meeting on Thursday and give you a heads up to see whether you think it's a appropriate matter to bring up. But it sounded like you were winding up the meeting, but
No,
because I
we're
wasn't with you the first hour, I didn't know whether you had other things on the agenda.
no, we're moving into other business, Gordon. So you're up, and
Oh.
I have an the item too. So anyone
So
else? I have it.
shall we just wait our items until the end of the meeting?
Nope, no, you go ahead.
Okay,
My
so
meeting,
this is a quick item.
Yeah, go ahead, Gordon.
I was struck by the fact that I scored some applications that for very small amounts of money. I remember more than one, for instance, for like $5,000. And so, you know, once I guess I'd like to have a little discussion Thursday on, you know, regardless of how I might have scored that application, to me, it doesn't make any sense. It's not worth that organization going through the trouble of an application. It costs more to do the application than they're getting. So, but if I thought it was a good project, I'd like to help that organization shop that to private philanthropy and be able to approach that organization and say, look, you didn't make the threshold, but one of the reasons is that you were so modest in your request that we really think doing a full application and waiting 6 months, 4 months for a check, when we think that there might be some organization we could help you with. I mean, do you think the Attorney General's office or anybody else is going to be, you know, what's your reaction to that?
So Gordon, we're kind of in alignment. That was sort of my thought for what I was going to put forth in the end of this section is just, after I read it, I was thinking about sort of the unmet needs, but I also I treat this for like my board. So I was going to put forth like, what's the calendar look like for this committee? Like, what are we going to be talking about? And one of those big things in my head too, Gordon, was what you just mentioned. A little bit differently, but there are groups that had really good ideas, small amounts of money. Like, how do we, and channeling Todd a little bit when he's like, can we give people, like, how can we give people a small amount of money? So I was just putting forth that I'd love for us to look at it when we get through this, maybe in September, looking at what you said, Gordon, a calendar for the year. And I know the council's going to be changing, but so we'll take a little liberty. But I like where you're going with that myself.
Well, you brought up another point that another variation on that theme would be to just set aside a small amount of money for, $50,000 and don't require them to do an application. Say, here's, if you scored in this range and your request was not for more than $10,000, you can compete in this pool. Send us a letter, send us another letter that you'd be interested in that, and we'll get you a check in 30 days. I mean, they're almost like mini grants. We didn't expect mini grants in this thing, but there are some. So let's handle those differently potentially. So it sounds like at least the committee chair thinks that it's worthwhile to have a brief discussion about it on Thursday. That'd be great.
I think it is. And again, the United Way, that's what they discovered. So they have if you're applying for under 5,000, you're a different grant process than people applying for higher ones. So I think we can have that discussion.
Courtney.
I think that also raises, I think we called it the gold button last time Gordon and I were talking about it. I would really like to know if there's any LOIs that scored perfectly across the board, across all 3 scorers. Because if there are, I think I at least want to have a conversation about those are obviously clear front runners. Like me have talked about, sometimes they they get rid of the bottom scorers, they fund the top scorers, and then the middle scorers are the ones that have to like do a full grant application. I don't know.
Amer-
Gordon's making a face.
No, American Idol, the golden buzzer. You you get the highest scores on all the things. It's at least would be something interesting to talk.
The
So
only
on
problem
that-
I have, the only problem I have with the golden buzzer, I like the idea. If you get a perfect score, you get the golden buzzer. The only thing is, for some of those ones that I may have scored perfectly, I still have questions.
Mhm.
I still have questions about finance. I still have questions about what other organizations are funding you, because I don't want us to plant money that's coming from someplace else. And so, again, I like the golden buzzer. It certainly saves time, but I think there has to be some sort of way that we can still ask them questions before we write that check.
And also, is there any that have a perfect score and we don't have all of those questions about? I don't know, maybe it's one that gets the golden button.
I think the notion of golden buzzer with LOIs is a bit tricky for me.
Okay.
I think
fine.
like applications are another thing, but I think LOIs, like this is inviting people. This is a letter of intent. So I would struggle a little bit. I love the notion, but I'm not sure if it shouldn't be the application. But again, I'm
Well,
open.
the
I'm not
application, yeah, I mean, if you have a golden button at the application, you don't need a golden button. You're just getting funded.
right. But I guess that's what I was listening to, Gordon. That's where my brain went, that we would have people that once we see their application, they would go forth, Courtney, to the way you described it.
That would just be funded though.
Yeah, just funded, right? But
Yeah.
I'm not sure the LOI is the place to make that decision.
Okay. All right. I give up. I'm just trying to.
No,
fast
I
forward.
and again, I'm not totally married. I'm anticipating what people could say, our colleagues.
Well, and if the committee would like, what I can do as part of my grant recommendation, as I mentioned, I'm anticipating recommending 3 tiers. I can adjust those tiers or add to them, and one of them can be an under $5,000 simplified grant, and one could be a golden ticket that's also simplified, and we can just differentiate those grants as sort of separate tiers that we're looking at. And we don't want to get too complicated into having too many different variations of our grant. But if there are 3 to 5 different variations of what we want to request, the level of detail, all of that, I'm happy to include that in the recommendation and proposal for discussion.
And honestly, Courtney, I think I just got confused. So I think, Gordon, to your point, we can talk Thursday, but we can bring it back because I think I'm a little confused with this. So we can bring it back to this meeting next month or next time. But I think we can move forward at the meeting, Pat, if you're good with that. Any other business from the group?
Good news. Piscataquis County has a signed contract and a check in the mail.
No, a deposit in the bank.
A direct deposit in the bank,
It's
I
better than a
believe.
check in the mail. The money is in their account.
It is their account.
And congratulations to Brandon and the state and and thanks again to the seller, Dr. Stabbard, who was so patient and has written me a nice note about the history of the building that we can use on some occasion, whether it's the grand opening or putting together a press release. I mean, I do think that that's something we should talk about Thursday too, is we don't have a communications person, we don't have a communication strategy, but when we do something like that, we really should at least issue a press release from the Maine Recovery Council saying that the first project funded is about to open or something. But again, discussion, let's add it to the agenda for a future meeting. I don't know whether it's a group of programs and grants discussion or a full council discussion, executive committee discussion, but a simple matter of course we should put out a press release on our projects. We just need to talk about how we're going to do that.
Celebrate the wins.
Yeah.
So with our cadence, I think our next meeting will be August 27th. Does that still work for folks? That's 3 weeks from today.
Let me, that will be pending the proper transfer of my Zoom webinar account to either Katrina or someone who's taking over for me. It's in the works to happen on exactly August 21st, so it should be done by then. But let me just keep you all posted about that process.
Thank you, Haley.
We don't want to talk about you leaving, Haley.
Exactly.
So can I also put out there that at the August or maybe even a September meeting, but preferably August, it would be great if this committee could start to think about a process for recruiting and establishing who we will invite to review the grant applications. And I believe most folks are wanting to invite external reviewers. So if we can just begin the process of what that looks like, if we invite a committee, what we can do, and we can, involve Brendan in that as well. But that would be crucial for scoring a grant.
Definitely. Okay, I think we're all set. Thank you, everyone.
So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
See you Thursday. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.